Good morning. It's wonderful to have all of you with us on a lovely Friday morning. We had nice rain, but it's also good that the rain has stopped, and we're grateful for your presence. Normally, during Convocation, I give a state of the school address. And this year, we thought we would reverse things, and instead of me telling you what I thought was going on at the school, we thought it would be interesting if alums told us what they thought was happening at the school or what should be happening at the school. And since it's a bicentennial, we also thought it would be helpful to have a historical take on this. And we've asked alums with one current student and 3 alums to give us their take on the school so that we have this over time. And we'll see, I don't know what they're going to say, but we'll see what they come up with. So let me first introduce the panel. We've just had, oh, here she is. So, and Sophie, you can turn your name tag, just turn it over, yeah, and then it'll be correct. So very good. So Sophie Beal is a graduate of Mount Holyoke College and came to YDS and did her M.Div at YDS while she was a member of the Reformed Studies program and a leader in that program. And like some students, we don't want to let them go, so we persuaded her to stay for an S.T.M. So she's a current S.T.M. student, so she'll give us the perspective of a current student. Kazimir Brown graduated from Santa Clara University and then UC Berkeley. Go Bears. I can also claim to that. In public policy, she then worked for the city of San Francisco in their administration as a budget analyst, and then was a political appointee for the Obama-Biden administration and worked there for a good number of years as, again, a budget analyst. Came to YDS, had a very distinguished career as a student while here. She helped run logistics. This seemed quite appropriate for BTFO 1 year while she was here. She was active in all kinds of things. Graduated in 2019 and then joined Repairers of the Breach, where she is currently employed and rising through the ranks of that organization. Jimmy Canton is with us this morning. So you're surrounded by people tied to Berkeley, so you've got to behave. He got his undergraduate degree at Stanford, so if you're from the West Coast, you'll understand that. But then, in a moment of enlightenment, came to Yale. No rivalries here. He received his M.A.R. in 1993. Jimmy has been with the Hole in the Wall gang from its inception. He started out as a camp counselor in the very first year that Paul Newman launched this organization. If you don't realize this, Paul Newman is from Connecticut, so the first camp was here in Connecticut, and Jimmy was there. This is 1988, and he rose through that organization from cabin counselor to unit leader to assistant director to camp director, and now, since 2002, he has been the CEO of the Hole in the Wall gang. He has grown this from 288 children with very severe illnesses, many of them terminally ill, in one summer camp, to now a year-round organization with 20,000, and they have just announced that they're adding a new facility, and they will double that number to 40,000. So he's done a remarkable job, and I will tell you, this is one reason why he won the Lux et Veritas Award in 2018. So for those of you who were in this room last night, you'll understand why I say that. And last but by no means least, my good friend, Stephen Bauman. Stephen is a YDS alum. He actually came because in 1972, the Institute of Sacred Music joined us from Union, where they were. And they started admitting students, or YDS students with ISM, in 1974, and he was in that first cohort. So that's his pedigree. He has, from 1987 to 2022, he's still trying to retire, been the senior pastor of Christ Church in downtown Manhattan. And he has taken that church from a dying church with about a couple hundred people. They built it up to over 1,200. I don't know what it's like exactly now after the pandemic, but but he has done a remarkable job at Christ Church. He was a radio personality in New York City and WCBS for over a decade, also on television. He's an author, and unsurprisingly, he is another Alumni Award winner, having won the Distinction in Congregational Ministry Award as an alum. So, these are our panelists. They're very illustrious, and we're pleased all of you could make it. So here's the format. I'm going to ask each of them a question which I, at least in my mind, maybe not theirs, but in my mind, is appropriate to their generation at being at YDS, and others are free to comment on it. And after we do that, we'll monitor the time. I might ask a couple general questions, but if it's at all short, I'm going to open the floor up so that you can ask questions. So that's the format. So let's start. Jimmy, I'll start with you. You've been shaped by many different people and different institutions, including Stanford, which is a great university, I have to admit. But my question to you is, how did YDS shape you? How do you, as you now look back on it, view its shaping of you and your career?
Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you. And I was sharing with Kaz when I for days I've been thinking to myself, why? What am I going to say? What do I said I was speaking to Kaz earlier and saying for days, what am I going to say? Why am I invited? I don't know. What have I done compared to so many folks? So how did it shape me? I think YDS, it freed me. I think it gave me permission to pursue service in a way that I didn't realize I could pursue. And I grew up Catholic, and so I wrestled with the priesthood for many years, and I loved theology, and so I thought maybe I could go on to teach. And I realized that I was not called to be a minister. The preaching alone, I don't know how you all do it if you're preaching. And then academics, as much as I loved it, imputed grace versus infused grace, vertical eschatology, I loved it. But I wasn't going to contribute anything really novel to the field. I just loved it. So I left YDS free of that, and yet knowing that I still wanted to be of use, and what I was starting to do at Hole in the Wall, just it's so interesting how when your mind is quieted, God can present these wonderful opportunities that you can't hear if your mind is telling you what to do, right? So that was, I think it shaped me by giving me permission to pursue things, to be my authentic self at Divinity School, and yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you very much. That's, it would be interesting if we had the time to have everybody answer that question, but I'm going to move to another question. Kaz, you're in a position, just because you're working for repairs of the breach, that you see this up front and in large print every day. That is, that our world is changing and changing very quickly. How do you think YDS needs to change, and what needs to change to try to address the changes that you see happening in our world?
As you're saying, I am very honored to be back at school after 3 years, so thank you. As far as the changes that I'm seeing, well, one, I would like to say that it's not all doom and gloom. We have some really beautiful changes that are happening. In this world, we're more connected than ever. We are able to see people across the country, make friendships, make connections. We have developing language about new topics or topics that were seen as taboo, things regarding communal wellness, trauma management, gender and sexuality. All these things are good things, but we are, yes, seeing things that are not the greatest. We're seeing what's happening overseas, in Iran, in Russia. We're seeing what's happening here at home, at the borders, the treatment of immigrants. We're seeing what's happening to the disenfranchisement of the poor. We're seeing what's happening to our faith communities. And so when I think about what a theological education can do to support, one of the things is being able to translate the skills and the things that we have learned here to others who might not know what Div school is or what seminary is. One of the ways is having certificate programs. And I know we have a few here, but having public theology and public policy certificates, having theology and ecology, theology and psychology, theology and gender studies, things where people, when you step off the hill and you can ask people, what did you do? You can say, I was able to study these things. And that can translate to others because the work that we're doing is truly interdisciplinary. It's truly interdisciplinary, and a lot of people are able to kind of translate that as to how that affects them at home. For me, one of the big things is also being able to serve in a community, having the hard skills like negotiations, conflict management, being able to learn how to facilitate a meeting or agendas, being able to have the experiences to be connected to other seminarians in different states and different countries. Those are the things that I say are so important because they're building relationships, they're building different perspectives. And when you were putting on my policy hat on, when I think about public policy, it has to come from the people. It cannot be something that you think about in a closed room and you're not interacting with people. When I'm speaking with folks in Jackson, Mississippi, and they don't have clean water, you have to ask them, what is that like on a day-to-day? That's where the policies come from. When you ask somebody when they don't have enough for a co-play and you're thinking about universal health care policies, that's where it comes from. So when I think about the theology that we have here and training that we have, that's all translatable. What the divine says about creation, what the divine says about community, that you can't get away from that. That's inescapable. And I really feel like part of the thing that I came here with and left with was being able to have those connections, see those ties, be encouraged in that. And I think there's additional ways that we can continue doing that that translates to work on the ground as well.
Thank you very much, Kaz. So I hear you understand why she works for Repairs of the Breach. But that's really helpful. Sophie, let's turn to you. You're now in your 4th year at the school. So you're enmeshed in this at present. What is it that you would like to see continue, and what is it that you would like to see changed about the school?
I'm also grateful to be here. I'm grateful to have made it, so thank you. So this institution, I knew I wanted to come here when I first visited because there was what felt like a unusual balance between commitment to making the world a better, more equitable place, to creating real change on a practical, down-to-earth level, and at the same time, a real commitment to engaging one's spiritual life, to showing up in Marquand. I think Marquand services, just on a really basic level, I hope that never changes. I think that's one of the most special things about this institution, and something that allows the students to be creative and take an active role in their education in a practical way as well. So that's related, I guess, to something that I hope changes, and I do see, I would say, whispers of this starting so now, as Dean Sterling has mentioned, I'm in my 4th year, so I've,
Yeah, your mic cut out.
here we go.
There we go.
Okay. Being in my 4th year, it turns out that a lot can change in 3.5 years now, especially when you go through a pandemic. So this will be actually my 3rd year actually in person, whereas my 2nd year was spent mostly in my bedroom on computers. But as challenging as the pandemic was, I don't want to give a silver lining perspective from here. Nothing can make that okay. At the same time, that period of uprootedness forced this institution and forced all of us, I think, to think more to imagine new ways of being in this space and with one another, and how to engage academically as well. And so something that I hope continues to change is creativity, looking for new ways to be creative, and looking for new ways to experiment, to find spaces. I think Kaz sort of spoke to this, but I really believe in interdisciplinary work really strongly. That has been one of the most formative things in my experience at YDS, and something that I'm always looking for new spaces to explore. And I also, I think that there have been more professors starting to find opportunities to maybe offer a final project or a paper. If you're the kind of person who just loves writing 20-page papers, great, go for it. Or I've had, in some of the intense academic classes where, you're studying systematic theology, and normally that would be a space to do kind of traditional argumentation. There have been opportunities to write a sermon series for your final project, to create an art piece, and then, an additional piece to go along with it. These are opportunities, I think, to subvert some of the structures that have actually been exclusionary for some students, that have made some students feel like they don't belong, that they don't have anything to offer. And I hope that changes. I think that there are more ways to speak and to engage now, even than there were 3 years ago for me. And I hope that we continue to look for new ways to do that as well.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Sophie, can just press it again. So Steve, last but not least, one of the things I've noticed is that people's perspective changes as their life marches on, and they look back on things. And so my question to you is, you are in a bit of an unusual position because you've been a member of the Dean's Advisory Council, so you've had your hand in this too. But how has your perspective on the school changed over time in the way that you perceive the school? And what would you like to say to all of us about what you think we need to be thinking about based on how you see things now?
Well, it actually has changed quite a lot. When I came to YDS, I was 21 years old, and very unsure why I was here. I felt deeply called. I wouldn't have wound up at a denominational seminary. I came to YDS because through a series of serendipities, really, and through music, because music was my pathway to God. And I felt a deep sense of call to be working on behalf of what matters most, is the way I would frame it. And YDS offered that invitation, which is why I wound up here. I think that invitation remains at YDS, which is a real gift. It's a gift to the wider church. It's a gift to the wider culture, as a matter of fact. And that invitation also shaped how I went about the project, which is that it was a very ecumenical project for me. I didn't come as a member of a church even. I decided to get ordained before I was a member formally of a church. And I wound up a Methodist, kind of also through some serendipities. But YDS gave me the opportunity to realize that no structure had the truth. There was no structure that had the truth. And it reaffirmed the essential foundation of my faith, which was deep and powerful and true. And that's what I wound up bringing into the ordination process. And I wound up a Methodist because I found a congenial location theologically with the Wesleyan methodology. I was never enamored particularly of its polity, but then I would tell you I was never enamored of anybody's polity. That was a gift I was given through YDS. And we all know that the church is struggling now massively. The Methodist Church is in the midst of a formal meltdown. And my thought about that is that I'm not grieving that all that too much. I am grieving the loss of and the fracturing of community-based, rooted in faith. That I'm grieving. But I'm not grieving particularly the fracturing of the structures. And I'm hopeful about what can emerge. So what does that mean? So YDS provided this invitation to me and formed me through that invitation and helped me strategically orient myself doing ministry, as it turned out, in the middle of New York City. In that sense, I was well prepared by YDS. But YDS has had to change over the course of the decades since. And I think it's still struggling to figure out where its place is going to be culturally for the moment. Although I am heartened, and again, Greg, through your leadership and Harry's before that, at the time I've been on the board, I am alert to the creative engagement that you all and that the entire enterprise is bringing to bear. The truth is, I think the role of YDS has never been more important. There's nothing as unique as YDS culturally and strategically, educationally, in its capacity to bring people into greater awareness of what it means to be a person alive in communion with God and their neighbor. As it strives to continue to press against all that keeps people apart and separate, YDS will be advancing a cause for the greater good. I think the common good is suffering dramatically. I am alert in my own life that I want to be committing myself to the work of restoring a commitment to the common good of all. And that has required a reinterpretation over these last decades. What is that common good? How do we embrace it? Who is included? How do we break down those barriers? YDS has a crucial role in forming people and forming their character where they become embodied agents of that kind of transformation that we so desperately need and want for our world. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that part of what goes on here is shaping one's character. And that's a big deal because we send people out into the world who have been formed by this commitment. And not in a doctrinaire way, in a completely whole and wholesome way. Just one other thing I want to emphasize. I so hope that YDS keeps a bead on on forming people spiritually, deeply spiritually. In my time, I was here when Henry Nouwen was here. And the university then, the school then, had a struggle with with bringing these components of what it means to be an alive Christian doing good work in the world. And Henry was a kind of a intervention in that regard for YDS. And I appreciated that very much. Anyway, another professor who helped me accept myself was James Diddis. And because of your questions, Greg, that you sent out, you said you might think about who helped you here at YDS. And I thought of Jim, and he died in 2009, but I hadn't thought about him for a long time. So I just started doing a Google thing, and I read a number of eulogies. And he died of Parkinson's, but there was a eulogy, a brilliant eulogy written by a friend in a psychological magazine who spoke of his wife and how she sang to him in his last days a lullaby that had been important to me. It was a coincidence, of course, that I just stumbled into this, but it was a lullaby that she sang, and it went like this: like a ship in a harbor, like a mother and child, like a light in the darkness, I'll hold you a while. We'll rock on the water, I'll cradle you deep, and I'll hold you while angels sing you to sleep. And she sang that to him with him in her lap in his last days. And she reported that he said to her, "You must love me very much." And I thought, wow, we have to stay alert to the fact that we need to bring tender care to the world that hurts dramatically. I so hope that we are able to maintain that commitment and shape people who are deeply committed to that project. Church needs leaders who are effective, creative, authentic, committed, resilient. That's what this place provides.
Now you understand why Christ Church quadrupled in size. So the time is slipping quickly away, and I want to give you a chance to ask a question. I don't know if anybody on the panel wants to respond to another panelist or add a little codicil to what somebody said from your own. I'll give you, it has to be short because I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions. But do any of you have something you'd like to add or ask or respond? You're happy? Okay, so let's open it up to the audience, and you can ask a general question or you may address your question to a specific member of the panel. And I'd ask you just to identify yourself, and as I like to tell audiences, if you have a comment, please disguise it as a question. Floor's open. Yes, in the far back.
Hi, I'm Amy Yunt, and I'm class of 92. One of the things I've been hearing over the last 24 hours has been the many different paths to ministry, and thinking about that interdisciplinary work that is so vital. And that's been part of my story post-YDS. And I'm curious if, in addition to certificate programs, which I think sound really exciting, if there's been thought about combining with other degrees I remember one of the things that brought me here, I didn't end up doing it, but was the fact that YDS offered an M.Div MSW combination. And I'm curious if, as we look to the future and people sort of exercising their ministry in a whole variety of settings, if there's been some conversation about increasing those kinds of multi-degree options.
In some ways, maybe I should answer.
Microphone?
Sorry, I just hit it. But we have 6 joint degree programs at present, and the barrier to those degree programs is the tuition at the other schools, is the single biggest barrier. And we have the lowest tuition at Yale, and some of our peers who are very happy to work with us have double that. So that's a challenge, and they don't offer financial aid as we do, which presents a real challenge for students. About 20% of our students present, and I see our registrar, and Lisa, you can correct me if I'm giving the wrong number, about 20% of our students do routinely take classes throughout Yale. I wish that number were higher. I mean, they can take a class, that's different than being in a joint degree program. But yes, there has been significant discussion, and I think everyone agrees, and everyone would say that one of the great strengths of being at the Divinity School is access to all of Yale. And the challenge is also somewhat even geographical. I like to say it's 1 mile from here to Sterling Memorial Library. It's 5 miles back up the hill. And so if you have a class, a schedule, just getting back and forth can be something of a challenge. But it is a very good point, and yes, it's discussed and discussed widely. We have probably the most active program is with the School of the Environment, which is closest to us. And the biggest challenge there is the cost. Do any of you want to say anything in addition? I think all of you agree interdisciplinarity is really important. I think we're all in agreement. We just have to find ways to facilitate it more effectively. I think that's the key. I will tell you that we're in the process of trying to hire one ethnographer as a way of broadening the social sciences at YDS. Okay, somebody else had a question. I saw a hand. Yes.
I'm about Goldstein class of 71, I think. Age catches up with me. But this may be a bit out of left field, but with reference to the common good, I would like to know reflections on, and the purpose of the Divinity School has an effect on how we see the common good. And yet, in my opinion, we have a court that is overcome by libertarianism, in my opinion, is destructive of any notion of the common good, but individual rights seems to overcome everything. And I wonder if some members of who think this is relevant could speak to this.
Well, I don't know that I have a specific response to the way you framed the question, but in general, the common good seems to me to be something we have to recapture as commanding our attention as a first and foremost priority. It's fracturing our nation, the fact that it has slipped away from our attention, and a lack of conversation about it in the common life and in the cultural life and in our political life. And my own personal take is that I hope that it will become recaptured by a place like YDS, so that the conversation becomes recharged within the culture. This is a long-term project. This is not a short-term thing. These are things that have been slipping away for a lot of years, as you kind of inferred in your comment. So that's a general thought that I have.
Well, the biggest thing that comes to my mind is the word common. So redefining what it means, like what common is. And when the work that I'm doing, common is 140 million poor and low income people in this country. Common is that we have people not able to pay their water bills. Common is people being deported and ripped for their families. Common is having native holy sites, like literally in Oak Flat. The thing that connects them with the divine is being sold off for copper. So for me, when I think of common, it's expanding the conversation to bring in what is your common. And then from there, we can talk about what's the good that we're talking. What is the good of healthcare? What's the good of having a roof over your head, of having an education, of having, safety and security? And when I think about rights, well, what is a human right that we all have? And thinking about bringing that moral analysis, that moral articulation, the moral action that must come with that. And so when I think about common and also rooted in spiritual practices, what is a common way that we're addressing our own spiritual needs? What are the embodiment practices that we're doing? What is the scholarship that we're having that is common, that is for the communal good? I think we are in a time where from our ministries to our scholarship, it has to be directed towards community and towards community care. It might not be about answering and fixing a question, but it has to be directed towards the person who is in need. And so I think the biggest thing is expanding that conversation and really broadening it so we can bring more voices in.
Yes, Jonathan.
I was really touched.
Can you identify yourself to
My
deliver?
name is Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove. Glad to be here. I'm from Carolina. I was touched by your story, Stephen, and it made me think about how particular the bonds of love are. It's always about relationship. And it reminded me of a story of another seminary I know, where during the Trump administration, a student who was in a class that the seminary was holding off campus, who happened to be undocumented, he was entrapped at the USICS meeting and detained. And because of the particular relationships so many people had in that community with that person, when we held a Eucharist service outside the jail where they were holding him, I was just struck to look up and see the dean of the seminary was there. Not somebody who fashions himself as an activist, but it occurred to me that the bonds had been formed across a line that made it impossible for him to stay away because one of his students was detained in his jail. And it just makes me think about, in terms of some of the things I've talked about, how can you imagine a divinity school sort of expanding those bonds in the formation process that happens when people are here?
Well, tangible acts of kindness, right? Tangible acts of loving one's neighbor as oneself. Years ago at Christ Church, we fashioned our mission to be simply, we seek to love God above all things and our neighbors as ourselves. I am so glad that we did that about 25 years ago, because as denominations fracture, as doctrines crumble, as our ability to be together creatively for the common good, falling back on these essential ideas that are just core to what it means to be a person of faith, walking the walk with our fellow humans in this way. We need to be very specific, tangible, and specific in how we exercise this commitment. I don't know how else to respond other than to say you are right, in my opinion. That I think that has been an ethos of YDS. I think it could become more explicitly so, perhaps. I'm not as familiar with what the actual student environment is today. But if we're bringing this back to YDS, holding those values and then embodying them is a way that we will change the world. It isn't sexy particularly. It isn't dynamic. It doesn't take it doesn't change things overnight, but man, it will eventually, and it's extremely important.
I feel I probably have a responsibility to speak to this, the current student culture, since I am here. I think we're in a space of rebuilding those bonds right now. As I mentioned, there was a sense of fracturing. I think when I first came here, I've been told many times I was told by students who were here prior to the pandemic that something has changed, something has shifted. We're not finding as many opportunities, honestly, just to be together in community. And a lot of that had to do with just very, things that were out of the school's control. Namely, even last year when we were back in person, we couldn't have social gatherings. We couldn't eat together, like in the same room, except for during the lunch hour. And we made the most of those moments. And I think that little by little, something I get hope from is I think that those connections are building back up. But look, and the students are doing a lot of work to create spaces to build community among themselves as well. Something, part of the interdisciplinary commitment, I suppose, the M.Div farm, which is behind the school with the fire pit. People meet there every Tuesday evening just to spend time together and not do schoolwork. I know it seems really basic, but these are part of our spiritual and educational formation that have been missed and are essential then to move us toward one another, to move us toward action, both within this institution and beyond it after we leave, to teach us how to engage with one another in the world. So I think we're working on it, and I think it feels better this year than it did last, and I am hopeful that it will continue to build.
I would like to briefly add to, when I think about strengthening bonds of love, I think about strengthening bonds of love here in New Haven. And what does it mean that we're sitting on a hill? And I think that has been continuously something that we as a community over the years have talked about, and there's various ways that we've engaged. But what does it mean to come in here for 3 years, to call New Haven your home for 3 years, and only be rooted to the university, and not necessarily rooted to the community that makes the city what it is? So thinking about ways that we can strengthen that bond long term, and then recognizing that we have a cycle of people coming in 1, 2, 3 years, and how can you make that a way that doesn't feel like you're bringing people in and then bringing people out, or not bringing them in at all. Another way strengthening bonds of love is just through interfaith dialogue and connection and experience. And when I had the opportunity with Andover Newton to go to Israel, like that was life-changing. It still impacts me to this day. So having an opportunity to have those interfaith bonds of love, I think, are also just as important as well.
One of the unfortunate duties of being a dean is you have to keep time. And in just about 10 minutes, the next Beecher lecture is going to happen just down the stairs here. So we invite you to that. There's still a lot yet to occur. I want to recognize, because Kaz has 3 supporters here from Repairs of the Breach. So Valerie and Roz and Jonathan, just raise your hands. And Roz is sitting in the middle. Today is her birthday. So, happy birthday, Roz. And to any others who are celebrating a special day, we say a very happy birthday or happy anniversary, whatever your special day is. But thank you for being here. Downstairs at 10:30 for the Beecher lecture.